and welcome back to our coverage from the AWS Summit here in New York, which is live today on the AWS Twitch channel. I'm joined now by Prashant Prahlad from the AWS Management Tools team.
Hey Ian.
Hi, I'm going to ask Prashant a few questions about some new launches that we've done today, but before we get to that, perhaps you can describe for the audience a little bit about what the Management Tools collection of services are and what your role is on the team as well.
Sure, so I product manage a group of services, Cloud Trail, AWS Config, and CloudFormation, which are parts of the AWS Management Tools portfolio. The goal of the Management Tools portfolio is to enable customers to manage their AWS resources at scale without having to sacrifice the self-service aspects and the agility that people want to use the cloud for. So but still have the governance and control.
You mentioned 3 different service areas there. CloudFormation is quite a big topic in its own right, so let's come back to that in a second. But can you talk a little bit more about what those other 2 services are and how customers put them to work?
Sure, so Cloud Trail is your API logging service. It provides audit-ready logs around who did what, where, and when. So it doesn't have to be a human. It could be a program accessing your resources through an API call. It could be an IAM user accessing resources. So CloudTrail gives you a full audit history of all of those things that happen in your account. And AWS Config is a configuration management and resource inventory tracking service that has built on top of it something called config rules that help you automatically govern changes in your account with best practices that you've outlined. So think of it as your white paper that had your best practices are now available in code and run automatically.
Yep, okay, understand. So you mentioned AWS Cloud Trail there. There was an announcement in this morning's keynote about that service, so can you just quickly recap what's changed for customers as a result of that?
Yeah, so we're very excited about that. So Cloud Trail is something you had to turn on in your account. So you would get API history for what happened in your account only if you turn Cloud Trail on. With this launch, we're actually making that available to every AWS account without them having to turn Cloud Trail on. And they get 7 days worth of API history in their console as well as their APIs. So if you had to troubleshoot when you forgot to turn Cloud Trail on, you can still go and get the 7 days worth of API history.
And there's quite a lot of partner tools that work with the audit logging data that's recorded in Cloud Trail, right? So with that change, customers will continue to be able to use those tools, but they'll have automatic access to this 7 days of historical API usage data, is that correct?
Yeah, so if you're using a third-party tool with Cloud Trail, which many of our customers do, nothing changes. You just get an additional source of data. Now, if you've already turned Cloud Trail on, you're getting that data through the S3 delivery mechanism anyway. Now you're getting sort of just an API to use Cloud Trail even before you turn it on.
Okay, understand, great. So let's turn to CloudFormation. That's a big topic in its own right. Can you describe what CloudFormation is and also talk a little bit about how developers and customers put it to work as well?
Sure, yeah, CloudFormation is sort of one of our most popular services. And it's kind of your gateway into AWS. You provision resources using CloudFormation, then you manage them programmatically through what is called a CloudFormation template. And a CloudFormation template is this artifact that takes developer intent and then tells CloudFormation to go create resources based on that intent. So you provide that as code in a template, and CloudFormation is the execution engine that goes and provisions resources. So essentially what CloudFormation is doing is it's providing you a programming language to use infrastructure as code. And it's as simple as application code. So you use what you want when you need it.
So in the developer evangelism team that I work in, we quite often use this for sharing demos and for allowing other members of the team to recreate in environments that we've built within our own AWS accounts for demo purposes in the main part. So that's the use case that I know. Can you talk a little bit more about use cases that customers have for CloudFormation? How do they use it? And can you also talk a little bit about the relationship between CloudFormation and the serverless application model? Because those 2 things are related, like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So use cases first though, yeah?
Yeah, so templatized provisioning is just a very widely used capability. Our customers used it to share best practices within the company, so they have a central repository of here's the standard catalog of items that is rendered through a CloudFormation template. and different account owners can take from that template and provision those resources. So as an administrator, when I have to troubleshoot something, I know it's one of those 5 or 6 standard things, so troubleshooting becomes a lot easier. And of course, we have built a product called Service Catalog on top of that. So that's a very common use case. We've also seen customers use CloudFormation to create resources for test dev accounts in addition to production, so use the same template in test accounts.
This is where account consistency is important, right? So you've got exactly the same resource build in multiple different accounts.
Exactly. And before we launched a feature called stack sets, customers would have to have a single template, and then different accounts would have to take those templates and provision those resources for test and dev and application. And in many cases, they share best practices like you mentioned. And CloudFormation is also seeing a lot of growth in the serverless side, so serverless application frameworks, our SAM model, as well as Go Sparta and Chalice are all powered by CloudFormation, so you're seeing a lot of interesting new applications and frameworks built on CloudFormation. Our tenet's been, we provide generic capabilities to make the system better, and people build application-specific stacks on top of that, and those are examples of that.
Now you mentioned stack sets there, which are a new feature for CloudFormation that's been recently announced. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and how customers can use that feature?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we observed before we created stack sets was people were using accounts as sort of an isolation boundary for their application or for their teams. And very quickly, a lot of our customers had many accounts to manage, and they were trying to figure out how they use CloudFormation, which is a very account-specific capability across these accounts. So based on the feedback we heard, we built stack sets, which allows you, which is exactly as it sounds. It's a set of stacks that are provisioned across different accounts and managed through a central account. So a stack set in your administration or security account will contain pointers to all of the stacks in your other accounts. So basically, you can take the same template and deploy it across all your accounts.
So presumably you need IAM roles and trust relationships to be established to do that, yeah?
Yeah, so the most common use cases are IAM roles. They want a consistent set of IAM roles across account. Then we've seen governance capabilities like Cloud Trail being turned on across all of these accounts, and not just being turned on, but pointing to the same S3 location to get the data. And then we're seeing things like config rules being turned on, and we provide a set of basic capabilities when you create a stack set, so you can just click and get started.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions that are coming in via the Twitch chat. If you do have questions, don't forget that you can submit those via Twitch chat at any point and we can address them live for you. So there's a question from Zoomage. He's asking when CloudFormation will have the ability to allow changes to existing environments. So to discover resources maybe, or add resources to a stack and then bring those under CloudFormation governance. Is that something that you've heard from other customers? It's something that you've got planned?
Yeah, it's something we've heard from customers. It's something we're actively working on and trying to make it work with all the other features we have. We're very aware of this requirement because not everyone starts with CloudFormation, but we're definitely working on it.
Yeah, and then the other question is about config rules. I'm not quite sure about this question. Maybe you can put this in context. What's the difference between these new rules and existing config rules? Yeah,
so today we announced 2 additional config rules for S3 bucket access, and they're actually very different from the other config rules because the other config rules check very static configuration changes. So for example,
security groups is one that's commonly used, right?
Or your tags are
routing
okay.
tables,
Or your tags are okay on your resources. These are very static configurations. Now, what the 2 rules we announced today, they actually use constraint solvers to actually validate whether a statement is true or false. So it's your computer science style formal analysis of IAM policies, which is supremely complex. But we've simplified it and said, okay, we're going to apply it to whether your S3 bucket is publicly readable or publicly writable. But there's a lot of computer science that goes behind each of these rules, and there's a session we're going to in depth on that.
Okay, there's a session today on that, so that'll appear on YouTube after the event in a couple of days. If you want to know more about that, might jump onto the AWS YouTube channel and look that session up then. Okay, good stuff. So stack sets is one new feature for CloudFormation. Is there anything else which is new for CloudFormation that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's a lot in store for CloudFormation, and there's a lot of features that we've launched in that direction. Obviously you saw YAML as a new language in which you can communicate with CloudFormation in addition to JSON. We added stack termination. That's a recent feature that we updated, the ability to create nested stacks on resources. So we're all trying to make sure CloudFormation as a service scales and appeals to developers who do test and debug loops in CloudFormation.
Yeah. Got another question from Zoomage via Twitch chat. Is asking, this is a question that I've heard quite a lot actually from developers. So, why is there a lag between CloudFormation support for new services and new services themselves being made available? For example, workspaces and the Active Directory connector for the AWS Directory Service, I think, they're not available yet as supported resources within CloudFormation. So why isn't CloudFormation support in lockstep with new services?
Yeah, no, definitely something we aspire to do.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, CloudFormation as a team is trying to catch up with all of AWS. And if you're a customer and trying to catch up with AWS, you know how fast AWS is. And CloudFormation is kind of riding that horse too. It's pretty fast. So it is taking us a little bit of time to get there, but we have several mechanisms we're working on internally to actually have services also own that capability. Okay. So we'll make sure that it's going to get better. Now, obviously, I can't comment on how long it'll take, but we aspire to have CloudFormation support for resources within a very predefined amount of time after the service launches.
Okay, great.
And bring that down.
Yeah, and bring that time down. So the model, maybe I'm presupposing how this is going to work, but there must be some sort of process here to help the service team self-serve with CloudFormation support.
Exactly. So we're actually moving in that direction where services themselves will own the support for CloudFormation, making that easier for them, and maybe in someday we'll have customers do that too. Okay,
great stuff. Any other new features that you want to cover?
So I'll mention a generic thing. CloudFormation is today is very focused as an engine that executes the template, and of course coverage and all of these other things make a lot of sense. We're obviously going to invest in that and make that the best it can be. But the analogy I most often use is you're expressing intent in a very primitive form, kind of like assembly code. Yep. You're telling CloudFormation to do X, Y, and Z in very primitive forms, and you're asking for capabilities like looping and things like that. And it's kind of back 40 years when we had to write assembly code, and compilers came in, and there was a higher level language which translate things into assembly code, and the compilers would deconstruct loops and kind of make that a lot easier to process. So we're in the same place with CloudFormation today. So think of your cloud as your CPU that's executing things, a big one, and your CloudFormation template is your assembly language today. But if we if we move down the path of higher level languages, you'll see that there'll be more developer tools in that realm, and having more of people expressing intent in much simpler forms than JSON or YAML that you see today. Yeah. So we're very excited about that.
So that's your longer term vision for the service, to have more higher level abstractions, more logic, more variable support in the tooling to enable developers to simplify the process of creating and maintaining more complex sets of resources.
Exactly, yeah. We have a whole developer experience planned on that, so we're very excited about that in the future.
Okay, great. Question from Randall Hunt, who I think a lot of our regular Twitch viewers will be very familiar with. So, how is multi-region support developing with stack sets? Is that a feature that you'll have in the future to enable customers to create the same sets of resources in multiple regions around the world?
Yeah, in fact, stack sets itself is agnostic to accounts or regions. So you can say a stack set could be a single stack across all your AWS regions. So for example, if you had an application that was a single application that is in a single account but had to be deployed across multiple regions, today you can use stack sets to do that.
Okay, great. And then from Zoomage again, it would be nice for CloudFormation to be able to pull from code commit directly. Now I do know that you can do this today with AWS CodeStar, and that you can build a pipeline so that changes to code commit will be reflected in the resources in your environment, and you use a build step in CodeStar in order to enable that. But is there any plan in the future to have CloudFormation directly integrated with Code Commit or other source code repositories?
We've definitely heard this piece of feedback before. It's hard for me to remember how it's been prioritized, but I'll take this feedback back to the team and see what we can do.
Great. It would be nice if we could deploy the code deploy agent to an auto-scaling group on CloudFormation.
Okay, that's excellent feedback. We'll definitely take that.
Great. Excellent. Good stuff. So I think, anything else you want to cover? Or?
No, this was it.
Great stuff. Okay, so we're going to wrap up this slot now. We're going to be back in just a few minutes actually at 1:30 Eastern Time with the AWS Maker Studio, and I'm guessing that when we come back at 1:30, this table will be full of robots and sensors and Raspberry Pis. So join us in 10 minutes with Todd Varland and the rest of the AWS Maker Studio team. Thank you, and thanks a lot, Prashant.
Thank you.
Good to have you here today. Thank you.
Likewise, thanks.
Bye-bye for now.